When he first saw a beautiful girl named Christel, a boy named Nate Cooper fell madly in love and made her a beautiful Valentine card. However, when you're only 6 years old, things often don't turn out the way you think. 20 years later, Nate Cooper, living in a modest apartment, remains unlucky in love. Due to his unserious attitude towards life, women constantly leave him, and Jane was no exception. She was so angry with Nate that she wrote "loser" on his car with paint. Jen no longer wants to waste time on someone like Nate. At this moment he realized that no other girl would make him happy except Christel Abbott. In the past, all the classmates gave Valentine cards to Christel, which cannot be said about her ugly friend June Fig. Now Nate is determined to find Christel and has come to Los Angeles to his friend Arno Blunt, hoping for his help. Arno still lives with his mom and overindulges in sweets. By the way, Nate is an art historian by education, so he is unemployed. Seeing a photo of grown-up Christel, Nate was amazed because she had become even more beautiful. But June, on the contrary, had become even uglier. Nate was surprised that the girls were still friends. According to Arno, Christel doesn't have a boyfriend because her scary friend, like an evil dragon, guards the beautiful princess. Since Christel also lives in Los Angeles now, Arno knows everything about her life and even her daily routine. Soon Nate was waiting for the love of his life on the beach, where other admirers of Christel had also gathered. She jogs here every morning. Without a doubt, Christel is the most beautiful girl in Los Angeles. Everyone dreams of marrying her. On the street, Christel catches hundreds of admiring glances. Gathering his courage, Nate approached her and started a conversation. Though not immediately, Christel eventually recognized him. Nate couldn't hold back a happy smile. Later, they had lunch at a cafe. Christel said she works for a charity. She has neither a boyfriend nor children. When asked about his job, Nate lied that he was a personal trainer. Christel invited him to yoga, which she attends with her best friend June. Of course Nate agreed. Christel wrote her phone number right on his hand. Nate was sure it was fate. When Nate arrived at the yoga class, he couldn't take his eyes off Christel. However, upon seeing June, he was horrified. Nevertheless, Nate had to kiss her on the cheek out of politeness, which caused him psychological trauma. June was truly awful in appearance. By the way, she works at the zoo. Nate tried his best to be nice to June, understanding that this was the only way to win Christel's heart. During yoga, Nate admired Christel, but he also couldn't help but look at June, who was the embodiment of everything unattractive on earth. After the class, Nate invited Christel on a date. She replied that she was ready for a serious relationship, but only if June also found her love. Until that moment, Christel had vowed not to date anyone. Nate realized he had to find a boyfriend for June and asked Arno for advice. But even Arno's mom didn't believe that anyone would be interested in June, especially since it wasn't just about a single date but about a lifelong love. However, Nate was determined not to give up and invited Christel to a picnic, lying that he had found the perfect guy for June, his friend Cole Slauson. Christel suggested a double date, so Nate had to improvise. Later, he posted an ad for volunteers for a medical experiment, offering $500 a week. Now all he had to do was wait. One man showed interest in the ad. Before he could call the number, Nate cornered him and asked if he would agree to go on a date with a not very attractive girl for the same amount. Since the man had never had beautiful women in his life, he agreed. June was very nervous, as this was the first date of her life. While they were waiting for their suitors, a handsome guy approached their table and began shamelessly flirting with Christel, ignoring her unattractive friend. However, June quickly scared off yet another admirer of Christel. This always happened. When Nate appeared with his so-called friend, June became even more nervous and, on Christel's advice, had a cocktail. Seeing June, the man with the fake name Cole was shocked. He didn't expect the girl to be so unattractive. To prevent Cole from running away, Nate nudged him toward the table. Cole realized he couldn't do it, so Nate whispered a promise to triple his reward. Soon the group was preparing for a yacht outing, but upon seeing June, the captain ran away in fear. Cole also wanted to flee, but Nate stopped him by giving a bottle of whiskey. Without a captain, their yacht trip didn't happen, so they just sat and drank. Nate tried to keep the conversation going with June, who by the way turned out to be an interesting conversationalist, unlike frivolous Christel. Looking at June, Cole barely suppressed his urge to vomit. Under the pretext of a stomach upset, Cole tried to leave, but Nate stopped him again. The date threatened to end in disaster. Nate and June had many common interests, while there was nothing to talk about with Christel. It was a wonderful sunny day, so she suggested they all sunbathe. Christel had a perfect figure and face, but June looked simply awful in a swimsuit. At some point Cole thought he could handle it, but eventually he screamed in horror and jumped into the water, swimming away. June was so upset that she got drunk. Nate gave the girls a gift certificate to a beauty salon, saying they could have a great time together. However, June didn't believe it would help. Christel advised her not to be so afraid of guys because most people look at us the way we look at ourselves. But even this didn't convince June, who had already resigned herself to loneliness. June knew that guys like Nate were nice to her only because they wanted to impress Christel. June got very drunk, and Nate and Christel talked alone. The girl felt guilty about her friend, not knowing how to help her. Christel remembered her vow not to get into a relationship until June found happiness. Nate decided to confess that he bought the beauty salon certificate just to get June a makeover. At first Nate really saw her as an obstacle to Christel, but now he genuinely wanted to help her. Nate and Christel decided to act together. Later, Nate, Arno and Mrs. Blunt subjected Cole to a small experiment. It was something like aversion therapy with a hypnosis session. Cole doubted that all these procedures would make him find June even 1% attractive. Nevertheless, he agreed to be put into a trance. The guys aimed to make it so that every time Cole looked at June's face, he would see a beauty. On command, the subject woke up. It seemed to have worked. Soon the group arranged another double date. June was not used to Cole looking at her with such adoration. By the way she started taking care of her skin, teeth and nails. The consequence of the hypnosis was that Cole began to behave oddly. Nevertheless, his strange compliments were pleasant to June. Nate suggested that Christel leave the sweet couple alone, although she didn't think it was a good idea. Suddenly a girl in the crowd said the code word, and Cole snapped out of the hypnosis. Seeing June's face, Cole screamed and ran away. Nate tried to smooth things over, comforting June. But when other people at the amusement park started laughing at her, she was on the verge of despair. Nate couldn't just leave it like that and wanted to stand up for June, but a handsome guy named Johan beat him to it. He invited the group to lunch at his luxurious home. They raised a toast to new friends. It turned out that Johan Woolrich was not married. He graduated from Harvard University and currently works as a dentist. He also served 2 years in the Marine Corps and occasionally works as a model. Johan seemed perfect. Sensing Christel's interest in Johan, Nate immediately tried to shift the attention back to himself. As a dentist, Johan immediately noticed June's dental problems and promised to help her with it. Arno was convinced that Johan was only paying attention to June to get closer to Christel. Obviously competing with someone like Johan was very difficult. Nate is in despair. Arno advised him not to let Johan and Christel be alone together. Nate must not yield to his rival and lie if necessary. Soon the group went for a walk. Since Nate and June, unlike Johan and Christel, were not physically fit, they quickly became exhausted. By the way, Johan is going to fit June with veneers next week, and she'll get the smile of her dreams. It turned out that Johan is also a pilot. To avoid looking inferior, Nate lied that he could pilot too. His attempts to appear better looked foolish. Christel couldn't stop admiring Johan's rich inner world. It got hot, and when Johan was about to take off his shirt, Nate knocked him over, lying that there was a scorpion on his back. Later from the car, Nate called Arno for advice. They urgently needed to come up with something Nate is good at. Suddenly a brilliant idea came to his mind. The group decided to have a snack at an open-air cafe. Nate pulled out a guitar, intending to sing. He didn't expect that Johan could also sing and play the guitar. But unlike Nate, Johan did it well. Everyone in the cafe started singing along with him. Nate realized he had lost. Christel and June couldn't take their admiring eyes off Johan. In the evening the group went to a nightclub. June felt unusual because the medication was working, and her skin was becoming clearer. Johan asked June to dance, but she refused, while Christel gladly accepted. Since Nate didn't want to yield to his rival in anything, he decided to have a good time with June. They first danced a bit near the bar and then drank, sadly watching Johan and Christel enjoying themselves together. At some point, Nate couldn't take it anymore and began to push through the crowd to disrupt Johan and Christel's dance. Christel accused Nate of being jealous. He in turn said he couldn't compete with someone like Johan, who seemed to be the male version of Christel. They both looked like mannequins. These words upset Christel a lot. She thought Nate saw her as a person, not just a model. But Nate turned out to be like everyone else. Christel said it was over. 2 weeks passed. Nate fell into a depression, spending his days in front of the TV and eating fast food. Arno realized his friend needed a jolt. Only one person could help Nate now, and Arno said that this person would be waiting for him at 5 o'clock in a cafe. Nate arrived at the appointed time and was greatly surprised to see June, who had changed beyond recognition. After treating her skin, nails and teeth, she had become truly beautiful. June was not used to attracting male attention. Later, they walked along the beach. Nate was still depressed over his breakup with Christel. In the evening at June's house, they ate delicious treats and had a heartfelt conversation. June was upset that Johan still hadn't made the first move. What now united Nate and June was their unrequited love. June promised to talk to Christel and ask her to give Nate another chance. The friendship between June and Nate was entirely built on trust. Suddenly Nate kissed her, not even understanding why he did it. June asked him to leave, fearing that it would ruin their friendship. A week later, the annual Masquerade took place. Nate attended, knowing that Christel was supposed to be here. Seeing Johan, Nate was not pleased. By the way, Johan and June were now together. June had already talked to Christel and settled everything. Christel was in a bridal costume because she had always dreamed of a wedding. Being very drunk, Christel told Nate that she had been wrong about him. As Christel's behavior became increasingly erratic, June hurried to take her to another room. Nate was not at all surprised to learn that Johan was also a great cook. Johan did not hide the fact that he always preferred less attractive girls because as they became beauties, they would be more grateful. Realizing that Johan was just using June, Nate became furious and attacked him in front of all the guests. But Nate didn't know that among other things, Johan was also skilled in hand-to-hand combat. Obviously the party was over. June was very angry with Nate, who was only thinking about himself. Nate tried to convey to June that Johan didn't truly love her and just wanted her gratitude. June didn't see anything wrong with that since she was genuinely grateful to Johan, and they had already been on 5 dates. June had never had a boyfriend before, even the least desirable men never paid attention to her. The problem with all fairy tales about the handsome prince is that it was nothing to do with reality. Nate had something to think about. Christel advised him not to interfere in June's life because being with Johan was her conscious choice. It turned out that Christel had pretended to be drunk to test Nate's seriousness. Since he kept his promise and found a guy for June, Christel was ready to be his girlfriend. Left alone with Johan, June was very nervous, while Christel was preparing a surprise for Nate. June came to the realization that Johan was indeed using her. Nate was right. But June should be grateful. Opening a drawer, Nate saw the Valentine he had given June 20 years ago to cheer her up. So she had kept it all these years and loved him? Nate directly asked Christel why she chose him, even though there were much more successful and handsome guys around her. Christel said it was fate since they met on that beach for a reason. Nate honestly confessed that he had intentionally searched for her. Understanding that Nate had fallen in love with June, Christel advised him to act right now. Christel wouldn't be left without a boyfriend anyway. Nate rushed to Johan, but it turned out June had already left him. Nate apologized and continued his search, finding June crying on the pier. Nate confessed his feelings to her. He was sorry that he hadn't been able to see how wonderful she really was before. June reciprocated his feelings. And so this crazy story of the search for true love ended.